Welcome to We Talk English. I'm Kashish. I'm here to help you get better at English. Today's video is all about why reading is so important. We'll tell the same story in two different levels, easy and a bit harder. Today's show is for people who are just starting to learn English and those who are getting better. We'll tell the same story twice, once for beginners and once for those in the middle. It's called Why Reading is So Important, beginner level. Why do you need to read in English? Generally, my students often ask me this. They think they go to classes, do homework, and watch films in English. So why should they read books? Actually, reading is the best way to improve your English. I will tell you why. At first, reading is very important. Now, in 2024, more than 10 in 100 people went to university. All jobs need more reading and writing than 100 years ago. This is true for every single person. It doesn't matter if you're an office worker or a mechanic. Second, reading will improve your speaking, writing, vocabulary, and grammar better than any other way. It won't improve your listening, but it will improve your vocabulary. When you have a better vocabulary, you can listen more easily and improve your listening that way. In school, you likely read a bunch of English stuff. Remember those dull textbooks and stories with questions at the end? But I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about reading for pleasure. When you read a book just because you like it, that's pleasure reading. You're not doing it because a teacher told you to or because you feel like you should. You're doing it because you really want to. In 1965, some schools in America tried an experiment. These schools were for boys who had done bad things, like stealing. They gave some of the boys free books. These books were breathtaking, like James Bond stories. The teacher said, "You don't have to read these books if you don't want to." But guess what? The boys did read the books. They read a whole bunch of them. Some boys finished a book every 2 days. After 2 years, the teachers gave all the students a test. The students who got the free books got better at reading and writing, and they enjoyed school more. But the students who didn't get the books didn't improve much in reading and writing. Some of them even got worse. This isn't just true for native speakers. They tried something similar with students in Fiji. They used 3 methods to teach. First, the usual way with grammar classes and exercises. Second, reading quietly in class. Third, reading aloud together with the teacher. After a year, the 2 reading methods were the most successful. They were much better than the students who did normal English classes. They tried the experiment again in Singapore. There, the students who read silently did really well. They scored the highest in grammar tests. The other students had grammar classes, but they didn't do as well in the tests. In normal classes, we try to remember grammar and vocabulary. When we read, we learn them naturally. Maybe you're thinking, when I read in English, it's too hard. I have to use the dictionary all the time. It's boring. I can't do it. I understand this, and that's why I wrote this book. I think this book will make you like reading because the stories are easy and fun. The early stories are short and easy, and the later stories are longer and harder. When you finish the book, you might think, wow, I did it. I make daily English audio podcasts on this YouTube channel called English Stories, and of course the stories are easy to learn. Now you can read the stories at beginner, pre-intermediate, intermediate, or advanced level. The stories are all fairy tales. Fairy tales. Some are very popular fairy tales, but some are not so popular. Maybe you are thinking, fairy tales? Oh, fairy tales are for children. I need useful vocabulary and need to learn about business and science. That can't be fun. Guess what? The vocabulary in these stories can be really helpful. John checked out words in a few stories. It turns out 85% of those words are on lists of important words, words for university studies. James and Roberts tried something similar. They wondered, if students read 1 million words of science fiction, will they learn important science words for university? And you know what the answer was? Yes. So yes, fairy tales are useful for you too. But I understand if you still don't believe me. When I learned about all this, I found it hard to believe too. But I like to try new things, and I love learning languages. So in 2019, I decided to do an experiment. I had wanted to learn French for a long time, but I didn't learn much in normal classes. I said, I will read 1 million words in French. Afterwards, I will see what my level is. 1 million words is about 20 novels, so it was a lot of work. I started with very easy reading, like our stories. Then I started reading translations of books that I knew in English. For example, I have read The Mystery Girl and a Beautiful Wife in English, so I read them in French too. Finally, I read new books in French. I loved them. I also listened to podcasts, but I always read the transcripts and added the words to my goal. After I read a lot, talked to native speakers and practiced, I got pretty good. I could understand most of what I read, could follow clear speech, and could chat with people. I spent more time reading than speaking. In 1 year, I learned a lot more than most students learn in 5 years. I didn't try to memorize grammar or words. I just picked them up and learned them naturally. Maybe you're thinking, I don't believe this. Or maybe you're thinking, wow, I'm going to read for hours every day. But I have to say something very important. You must read books that are easy. You must read books that are enjoyable. For this, subscribe to our channel. English Stories, an expert in language teaching, says, only read things in English that are fun and interesting. Read things that are really easy, that you wouldn't read in your native language because they are too easy. So you can read comics, magazines, detective stories, romance stories, and so on. Don't feel bad about reading translations. When you read really simple books, if there's a word you don't know, it's easy to figure out what it means without needing a dictionary. So what counts as easy? Studies suggest you should be able to understand at least 98% of the words in a text. 98%. That's a lot. Yes, it is. Let me give you an example. Imagine a text where 10% of the words aren't real. That means you only understand 90% of the words. Jerry sprang out of bed and opened the curtains. He hummed to himself as he made breakfast. He brewed coffee and spread butter on his toast. Someone called his phone and he answered it. He was very startled by who was tealing, so his cup slipped from his hand and fell on the floor. Is that easy to understand? Could you read a whole book of that? Here is the same text, but only 2% of the words are not real. So you should understand 98% of the words. Jerry hopped out of bed and opened the curtains. He sang to himself as he made breakfast. He made coffee and put butter on his toast. Someone called his phone and he answered it. He was very surprised by who was calling, so his cup slipped from his hand and fell on the floor. How was that? You probably didn't understand everything, but it was more fun to read than the first text. That's why reading for pleasure is so great. Maybe you don't understand everything, but you understand enough to follow the story, and you don't have to pick up a dictionary. So read for pleasure because you already read a story. You will know them well, and it will be easier to understand. Happy reading and happy learning. Intermediate level. Many students often ask me this question. Why should I bother reading books when I'm already attending classes, doing homework, and watching English films? Well, to put it simply, they're mistaken. Actually, reading is the best thing you can do to learn English, and I'm here to explain why. Firstly, being able to read well is really crucial now, whether it's in English or your own language. In 2024, only 10 out of 100 people went to university. Nowadays, all kinds of jobs, like office jobs or working with machines, need you to read and write much more than they did 100 years ago. There are more people competing for jobs now, and the ones who are good at reading have an advantage. Next, reading is the top way to get better at English in general. Yes, that's correct. Reading helps you with speaking, writing, learning new words, and grammar much better than anything else. It might not directly help with listening, but it gives you the words you need to understand spoken English faster. But it's not just any reading we're talking about. In school, you probably read lots in English, boring textbooks and stories with exercises at the end. No, we're not talking about that. We're talking about reading for pleasure. That means reading a book because you enjoy it, not because your teacher told you to, not because it's what you're supposed to read to improve your English. No questions, no book reports, just pure pleasure. Yeah, right, you're probably thinking that's too good to be true. Let me show you. In 1965, there was a test done in places where troubled young people were helped, called reform centers in America. One group of the students got books for free. These books were fun ones, like James Bond, that would interest boys their age. But unlike most reading plans, they didn't have to read the books if they didn't want to. They could throw them away, give them back, or even draw on the pages and nobody would get mad at them. But the boys did read them, read a lot of them. Some of them read a book every 2 days. At the end of 2 years, they tested the students. Not only did their reading and writing greatly improve, so did their attitude towards school. But the students who were not on this program stayed the same. In fact, some of them got worse over the 2 years. This isn't just for native speakers either. A study of English as a second language student in the Fiji Islands looked at 3 methods: traditional English teaching, sustained silent reading, which means reading in silence for a long time, and a more conventional reading program, where the teachers read aloud to the students. At the end of the first year, students who were taught using 2 different reading methods showed a 15-month improvement in their English skills, while those taught with the traditional method only improved by 6.5 months. In a similar study conducted in Singapore, students who practiced sustained silent reading performed better in grammar tests compared to those who only attended grammar classes. This suggests that while doing grammar exercises helps us memorize language rules, reading allows us to naturally absorb them. But I know what you're thinking. That's all well and good. But when I pick up a book in English, it's too hard for me. I get bored of looking up words, and I give up after a few minutes. That's why I wrote this book. It is designed to make you fall in love with reading by providing fun, familiar stories that are easy to understand. The stories are all fairy tales. Some are very popular fairy tales, but some are not so popular. Again, I know what you're thinking. Fairy tales? But those are for kids. I need useful vocabulary about business, science, and technology. There's no way to make that fun. Guess what? The vocabulary in these stories can be really helpful. John checked out words in a few stories. Turns out 85% of those words are on lists of important words for university studies. James and Roberts tried something similar. They wondered, if students read 1 million words of science fiction, will they learn important science words for university? And you know what the answer was? Yes. So yes, reading fairy tales will help your English in all areas, even for academic purposes. As an English teacher, I've seen many times that the students who do the best are those who read the most. For IELTS, for university, for business, or just for travel, reading is the factor that predicts success. But I understand if you're still unsure. When I learned about all this, I was too. But I like to experiment, and I have a passion for learning languages. So in 2019, I decided to do an experiment. I had wanted to learn French for a long time, but I didn't learn much in normal classes. I said, I will read 1 million words in French. Afterwards, I will see what my level is. 1 million words is about 20 novels, so it was a lot of work. I started with very easy reading, like our stories. Then I started reading translations of books that I knew in English. For example, I have read The Mystery Girl and a Beautiful Wife in English, so I read them in French too. Finally, I read new books in French. I loved them. I also listened to podcasts, but I always read the transcripts and added the words to my goal. After I achieved my goal, I tested myself by writing and talking to native speakers and found I was at a decent intermediate level. I could understand almost everything I read, understand clear speech, and have conversations at a comfortable level. Even though I had barely spoken the language since I started learning, I had been learning for about a year, and I had made more progress than most students make in 5 years. I didn't memorize the vocabulary, and grammar rules. I absorbed them. By this point, you're either thinking this is all complete nonsense or you're super excited, ready to start reading for hours a day. But the next thing I'm going to say is extremely important. You must read books that are easy. You must read books that are fun. If a book is too difficult or too boring, put it down and find another one. Stephen Krashen, an expert in the field of second language acquisition, says, "Read only material in the second language that is genuinely fun and interesting. Material that is so easy that you probably feel guilty reading it in your primary language. This is your excuse to read comics, magazines, detective stories, romances, etc. There is no shame in reading translations. Ideally, you want to be reading a book so easy that when you see a word you don't know, you can understand the meaning from context. Research has shown that in order for this to happen, the text needs to be at least 98% known words. 98%. That's so high, I know, dear reader, but let me show you an example. Here's a text where I've replaced 10% of the words with nonsense words. That is, it's 90% comprehensible. Is that easy to understand? Could you read a whole book of that? Here's the same text, but 98% comprehensible. Jerry jumped out of bed and threw open the curtains. It was a beautiful day. He sang to himself as he did his daily routine, pouring coffee and buttering toast. But then his phone rang, and the person calling was so unexpected that he dropped his Vinky on the floor. Did you like that? Even if you didn't understand everything, I'm sure it was much more fun to read than the first text. That's the amazing thing about reading for enjoyment. Even if you didn't get everything, you understood enough to follow the story and keep reading without needing a dictionary. So read for pleasure. Because you already read a story, you will know them well, and it will be easier to understand. As you read, focus on understanding the stories, and don't worry if you don't know every word. Just relax and enjoy getting lost in the pages. Believe it or not, we learn better when we have fun. These books are divided into levels based on the Common European Framework of Reference, which uses levels like A1, A2, B1, B2, C1, and C2. However, these books only cover levels A2 to C1. If you're at level A1, you might need more structured teaching before you start reading these books. If you're at level C2, you can start reading books written for native speakers. Hope you have enjoyed the reading.